For well over a century and a half, the most fortified border in North America, the one causing the most economic drag, the most headaches,
Yeah.
it wasn't the 49th parallel.
Yeah, well,
The longest, most complicated, and frankly most destructive border was the one running inside Canada, between its own provinces.
it really was. It was what a lot of economists, quietly called a national embarrassment. A massive self-imposed tax made of red tape and just decades of political inertia.
And the cost of that is just staggering.
Oh, it is. The sources we looked into for this are all remarkably consistent. We're talking up to $130 billion every single year.
130 billion.
That's wealth that was just left on the table, gone.
And here's the paradox, the real core of this deep dive.
Right.
What finally shattered that status quo, it wasn't some internal revelation. It was intense external pressure from Washington.
Right.
We're seeing the Donald Trump strategy, his plan of maximum economic pressure was designed to break the Canadian economy, but it had this completely unintended consequence.
It forced the provinces to break the chains they'd wrapped around themselves. It's a truly historic irony, isn't it?
It is. A planned fatal blow becomes the single greatest unifying catalyst in modern Canadian economic history.
And that catalyst produced the Canadian National Economic Accord, signed just 1 week ago. President Mark Carney, all 10 premiers, all in one room. It started as, a desperate shield against U.S. tariffs.
But it's become something much more.
It's become a declaration of internal economic independence.
Okay, so let's unpack this. That's the mission here. How did Canada manage to do in 1 week what it couldn't do for over 150 years? I think we have to start by understanding just how inefficient the old system really was.
I mean, when you look at the specific examples from the source material, the word is absurd. It wasn't just bureaucracy. It was an active barrier to doing business. Okay, so for a winemaker in British Columbia, it was literally simpler, faster to navigate international law and sell a bottle of wine in Tokyo than it was to sell that same bottle to a customer in Toronto. The paperwork was cleaner, the logistics were easier.
That's just incredible. And that's goods. But what about people? The talent, that has to be part of that huge $130 billion number.
Oh, a massive part of it. Exactly. I mean, think about the skilled workers. We found this one example of a carpenter from Alberta, 2 decades of experience, right? A master of his trade.
Yeah.
He crosses into Quebec. Suddenly, his credentials mean nothing. He's forced into months of bureaucracy, expensive recertification. Basically, his entire professional life gets reset just by crossing a line on a map.
So you're trapping your own talent.
You're trapping it, or you're forcing it south. It's an enormous drain on human capital. People just give up and go to the U.S., where the opportunities are bigger and the rules are simpler.
So that $130 billion isn't just lost wine sales. It's lost productivity. It's the cost of all that duplicated paperwork. How did that show up for bigger companies?
It was a nightmare. A national construction firm, for instance, might need 10 different building permits, 10 slightly different safety standards, 10 different labeling rules, just to operate from coast to coast.
10 times the lawyers, 10 times the overhead.
And that's before you even get to procurement. Provincial government contracts for roads, schools, you name it, they almost always mandated using local suppliers, even if those suppliers were 20% more expensive than a company one province over.
Right, and that inefficiency gets passed on to the consumer.
It inflates prices, and it throttles any attempt to build a company to a national scale.
Which, of course, created this really ingrained, almost cynical business plan for any ambitious Canadian company.
A very specific 2-step plan.
Right. Step 1, dominate your local market, say Alberta. Step 2, immediately look south. You just skipped the rest of Canada entirely.
Why wouldn't you? It was demonstrably easier for a food processor on the prairies to learn the rules for exporting to Ohio than it was to figure out the labeling requirements for Quebec.
You fight one U.S. federal standard instead of 9 different provincial capitals.
Exactly. And now, what's so fascinating is just how fast that's changing. The dam burst, the speed of the transformation since the accord was signed. That tells you just how much potential was being held back.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because we're already seeing the real-world impact in just 7 days.
It's incredible.
Take labor mobility. We found this case, a big hospital in Halifax. They were desperately short of diagnostic technicians. Before the accord, hiring someone from Ontario was a bureaucratic nightmare. Months of paperwork.
Recertification delays.
Now, with mutual recognition baked into the accord, they could just hire instantly from a national talent pool. That's a difference you can measure in patient lives, not just dollars.
And that's the core mechanism here. The principle is automatic mutual recognition. If you're certified in one province, you are, by default, certified everywhere. The old system is just gone.
And commerce is moving just as fast. There was an electrical contractor in Calgary. His entire business was tied to the boom and bust of the oil patch.
A very precarious existence.
For sure. But now he's bidding on a massive infrastructure project in New Brunswick. That was completely unthinkable 2 weeks ago.
And there's a direct quote from that contractor that it perfectly captures this whole mindset shift.
What does he say?
He said, "For my entire career, I thought of my market as Alberta. The rest of the country might as well have been on the moon. Now it's just Canada, the whole thing."
The whole thing. That says it all, doesn't it?
It really does.
So for you, if you're an entrepreneur, the entire map has been redrawn. The path of least resistance for a tech startup in Waterloo isn't Michigan anymore. It's suddenly Montreal with all its AI talent.
We are literally watching a truly national marketplace being born, an economy of 40 million people that, until last week, was carved up into 10 inefficient little fiefdoms.
But a change this big, this fast, it's never seamless, is it? You don't just erase $130 billion in protectionism without a fight.
No, you absolutely don't. And we are now witnessing let's call it the death rattle of that old protectionism. The old guards are not going quietly.
So who was benefiting from this broken system? Why did they fight so hard to keep it?
Well, they fought to protect their monopolies, their little kingdoms. The first group to cry foul was the Quebec Dairy Lobby, a very powerful group. They called the deal a betrayal.
A betrayal.
But what they don't mention is that their fantastic cheese, their yogurt, can now be sold freely to millions of new customers out west. Their fear isn't about the market, it's about losing their guaranteed protection.
And we saw something similar in Ontario, but with construction unions.
Yes, they threatened job action. They claimed that new labor from other provinces would degrade standards.
Which is always the argument, right?
It is. And while safety is a real concern, the underlying issue was clearly about protecting a system that limited competition, kept the labor supply tight, and, well, contributed to Toronto having some of the highest housing costs in the world.
Then you have the government bureaucracies themselves, the provincial institutions.
Oh, absolutely. Out in British Columbia, the government-run liquor distribution branch, a notoriously bloated organization, is terrified.
Because they're now forced to stock wine from Ontario and Nova Scotia.
On an equal footing. They call it damaging to the local industry. Consumers, on the other hand, are calling it choice.
This resistance was totally predictable. But the political calculation, the whole equation for the premiers, has been turned on its head.
It's completely inverted. For decades, the biggest fear a premier had was losing an election because they angered a small, powerful local group, a union, a dairy lobby.
But now there's a much bigger fear.
A much bigger unifying fear. The threat of total economic destruction from Washington. That external pressure finally became greater than the internal friction.
And then, the main catalyst himself, Donald Trump, just played his part perfectly.
To a T, he immediately ridiculed the accord, called it a pathetic little deal between failing provinces.
And then threatened more tariffs to punish them for uniting.
And every single threat, every insult, it did the exact opposite of what he intended.
It just poured fuel on the fire of Canadian unity.
It solidified their resolve. His mockery became the political cover the premiers needed to stand up to those angry local lobbies. One Atlantic premier said it perfectly off the record. He said Trump gave them the one thing they never had before: a common enemy.
And that's the spectacular irony here. The strategists in Washington seemed to completely miss this. Their whole plan was based on the idea that Canada had no other choice but to bend the knee.
They thought they were closing one door to the south.
And they never imagined that would force Canada to blast open 10 new doors running east and west.
Which brings us to President Carney's national address 2 nights ago. That was a moment. The optics were so important. She wasn't in some grand office. She was on the factory floor of a plant in southwestern Ontario.
Connecting directly to that message of making things, of internal strength. And her words were sharp. She didn't attack Washington. She talked to Canadians. She called the old system a quiet betrayal of our own potential.
And then came the key line. She said the accord wasn't just a shield.
She called it a sword.
A sword, a tool for building a sovereign nation. And then she delivered the phrase that's now everywhere. She said, "For too long, we have allowed our prosperity to be defined by what we can sell to others. That era is over. Canada will take it all back.
Take it all back. That's about so much more than trade rules, isn't it? That's about sovereignty.
It's a direct assertion of economic sovereignty, the power to withstand global shocks because you have internal strength.
So what does this new direction actually look like? This is clearly just step one of a much bigger national project.
It is. It means investment capital now flows to the most productive spot in Canada, not just the closest spot to the U.S. border. That's a huge shift.
It also means a real push to build national supply chains for things like medical equipment, EV batteries, critical minerals.
Exactly. The goal is to make sure the country is never again held hostage by a foreign power cutting off vital supplies. It's a fundamental pivot from a north-south axis of dependence
To an east-west axis of internal strength.
If you look at the history, this is the dream of 1867 finally being realized. The original national policy was about using railways and tariffs to resist the gravitational pull of the United States.
And they're finally succeeding where generations before them failed because of all that internal bickering.
And the rest of the world is noticing. While Washington is fuming, you have officials in London, Tokyo, the EU. They're all watching with intense interest.
Right. They no longer see a fractured dependency of the American empire. They see a stable, unified G7 market of 40 million people. That's a huge strategic win.
Now, we should be clear. The hardest work is still ahead. This isn't over.
No, absolutely not. That third rail of Canadian politics, supply management for dairy and poultry, it was only cracked. It wasn't fully dismantled. And harmonizing thousands of regulations is going to be a long technical slog.
But the momentum is undeniable. The entire political dynamic has inverted. Premiers are now competing to see who can be the most open for Canadian business.
It's just amazing. Trump thought he was dealing with 10 squabbling provinces he could easily pick apart. He fundamentally misunderstood that when you push Canada from the outside,
that quiet, stubborn resolve comes to the surface. His pressure was the one thing powerful enough to overcome the internal friction that held the country back for a century and a half.
And that's the real story. That empty chair at the negotiating table that Washington keeps pointing at, it's not a sign of maintenance. It's a sign that Canada is busy building its own house on its own terms.
The unity is real. The ground is shifting under everyone's feet.
So here's the final thought for you to take away. If that internal fragmentation cost Canada $130 billion a year, every year, for decades, what will be the final economic and geopolitical dividend of this new national unity? And how quickly will that dividend force Washington to fundamentally rethink its entire relationship with its suddenly much more sovereign northern neighbor?